Today we're going to be talking about condos and whether or not they are any longer a good investment. There's still a demand for condos. There are a lot of condos in Florida, and what we're going to be talking about today is coastal Florida. So I'm not talking about other areas of the center of the state, but coastal Florida. Are condos worth buying? Because what tends to happen is when people are considering a condo in coastal Florida, they're thinking about water views first and foremost. They're thinking about toes in the sand. They want to at least have a beautiful view that tells them, hey, I am in Florida. So are there any at all that are a decent buy? Should you buy a condo in the water? Should you buy a condo within 3 miles of a big body of water like the Atlantic Ocean or the Gulf of Mexico, or is it just too risky nowadays to do it? So we're going to talk through that today so that you can make a better decision for yourself if you want to take that risk, because you know life's all about risk and reward. Some risks are worth the reward. And depending upon your stage of life, if you're 75 years old and you just retired and you're in great health, and you and your wife, you and your husband, it's always been your dream to live in a condo, you just want something small, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, with a beautiful view of the water, of the Gulf of Mexico, of the Atlantic Ocean, that's what you've always saved for, then you might say, okay, you know what? I'm prepared. I know that there's risk in doing this, but just tell me the risk so that I can make a good decision. That is the person that I'm speaking to today. All right, number one, the first thing you're going to do if you are wanting to buy something, buy a condo that is within 3 miles of the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic, you want to very closely scrutinize all of the condo association or the HOA rules, regulations, finances, budgets. And by budgets, I mean you want to see the past budgets because you want to see what that trend looks like, and you want to see future budgets. So most of them will give you both. If they won't, that's a red flag. The other thing you want to look for is surplus. Is there enough money? Is there enough overage in every category? Don't just look at it as a summary. And I'm going to tell you, there are some HOAs that I have looked at financials and I've just cringed. And I'm looking at it thinking, this is so vague and so mismanaged that I wouldn't even consider buying in here at any price. Because if your condo association is terribly mismanaged, and you have to remember, don't make the assumption, don't bring what you know from your home state, don't bring that to Florida, because you might have a situation where Earl that lives at unit 103 for the last 35 years, he's managing the budget and he doesn't know how to turn his computer on. So trust me when I tell you, when we request those documents, sometimes the HOA manager can't find them. I'm telling you, it's more regulated now. Now there's actually rules in place where there was not before, but those rules are new. So you might bump into a situation where you're asking for things from 3 years ago or 5 years ago, and you can't get them. And I'm telling you, that is a red flag, because if you don't know how much money is available and it's being mismanaged, and Earl never answers his phone, and there's only 4 people that sit on the board, and the other 3 people, maybe they're in town, maybe they're not. You know, they do try to get a quorum when they vote, but some of these things can get very loose. That is definitely a red flag, and you don't want to say, yeah, but I love the view, so I'm going to live with it. You will kick yourself. You will kick yourself when you're paying for a new elevator shaft for $2 million and you have no idea they're going to assess you for $150,000. So don't fall victim to that. The other thing I would say, if you're thinking in your mind, wait a minute, I don't know how to read any of that, I have no idea if the accounting is correct or not, then you know what? Lean on your banker. If you're paying cash, lean on your banker and say, will you look at this? I don't know if this looks good or not. If the banker doesn't know how to read that, the banker will hopefully have a good lender in-house that the lender can look at it. But don't just guess at it because it's way too important. Number 2, look for the things that are going to be big ticket items. And this may be obvious, but people overlook this all the time. Look at the roof. Does the roof look like it needs to be replaced? Can you look at it from the ground level and say, that doesn't look so good? I can see cracked tiles from here. That doesn't look good to me. I think that's going to be an assessment coming forward. That might be then something that when you fall back and you're looking at those financials, you want to see an enormous surplus in the roof. And that's another thing I want to mention while we're talking about roofs. Don't make the assumption that the roof is covered. There can be something in the rules and regulations that state that you are responsible for X amount of the roof, or you may assume that this happens a lot on villas that are attached, like or a coach home where there's 4 roofs that are essentially connected to each other, or on a villa where the roof appears to be one roof, but there's a split through the middle. Don't make the assumption that logically you would think the HOA has to take care of that, because what if a hurricane comes through and you need a roof, then your neighbor who's attached to you, highly probable that they also need a roof. But let me tell you what, when those hurricanes came through, there were many scenarios where the neighbor next door might have had no insurance. He paid cash. He took the risk. He didn't even insure it. And he's saying,
well, I don't want to put a roof on. I don't need a roof. I'm not even going to put a roof on.
well, who's going to buy your unit? This happened. I had a seller that actually ended up suing the guy next door because he wouldn't put a roof on, and his roof was obviously, you could see it was damaged. He wouldn't put a roof on, and the guy who wanted to list his property, my client, we couldn't get it sold because he had a brand new roof and this looked awful on the other side. Don't make the assumption that the HOA is taking care of the roof. You need to read it and see it with your own eyes that they're taking care of it. And if there's vague language, then you're going to have a vague answer and the insurance company won't cover it. Number 3, ask for the historic sales data. Now, you're going to need to get that from a good agent. Your agent should be willing and able to pull past sales data. And I'm not talking about 4 months ago. We used to pull data from 4 months ago and that was good enough. No, not anymore. You're going to want to see the past year, and then you want to see pre-COVID. And for me personally, if I'm buying something for myself or I'm representing the buyer, anybody on my team is representing the buyer, we want to take a look at way back. We're going to go 10 years back because we want to see what everything has trended historically, because history is the best determiner of the future in some degree. The history of that property is going to create some ceilings in terms of price and some basements in terms of price, because we've been through this before. We know this. We've all been around in our first rise and crash back in 2005. So we want to see what those numbers looked like, even though that's a long time ago and you're not going to make an offer based on some obscure, well, I'm basing this on August 2008. But you want to see how it trends so that you can make the best decision that you can about that property. And then the last thing you want to know, and again, you want to talk through this with your agent, is the rental policy. You want to know what the rental policies are. Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it one time every 90 days? Can you only have a one-time 90-day rental? All of these things matter. Why? Because they layer into your exit strategy. I talk about this on my channel a lot. Acquisition price is extremely important. Layers of exit strategy are equally as important. And the more doors you shut in that regard, the harder it will be if something goes haywire or the unforeseen becomes seen. You know what I mean? These things happen. So I owned a house in Naples, and when I bought that house in Naples, you were allowed to rent your house once a month. So you could do a 30-day lease once a month. obviously. So you could do 12 leases per year. Well, about 2 years into me owning that house, they changed it to 1 30-day lease per year. 1 30-day lease. So you couldn't rent it on an annual lease. You couldn't do a 6-month seasonal lease. Nothing. 1 30 days. Vast change from the way that it was when I bought it. Now, that was my primary home, so I didn't really care, but to some degree I did, because when a community switches over to something that's either extremely loose or extremely tight, what can happen is properties will sit too long on the market because people don't want them. People don't want to live next door to a hotel. They don't want that VRBO thing going on, but they also don't want the rental restrictions to be so tight. Like sometimes it'll say you can't lease for the first 3 years. These are all things you need to know, because if you were planning on renting it out and you didn't read that one little line, then you're going to be in violation the second you try to rent it. And what's going to happen is they just won't allow you the rental. There's going to be nothing you can do about it. You can say, well, my agent didn't tell me. Well, it doesn't matter, because it was in those rules and regulations. So you want to know that, and you want to know if there's rumors that they're getting ready to change it, because that's what happens. They start talking about it ahead of time, and one of those neighbors, if they're going to the meetings, they're going to know about it. And the other thing you want to know is there a situation where one particular owner or company as an owner owns 51% of the units? So for example, there is a complex in Fort Myers, and it's really pretty. The units are reasonably priced. Most of them have a pretty water view, but when they were being built, a specific company that was coming into the area bought 51% of the units, because he wanted to use them. He wanted to hire people that were going to come in and work at his company, and then he wanted to hire them and be able to provide housing. So his thought was he'll set the rents, which he did, but what ultimately ended up happening is nobody could get financing. The rest of the 49% that wanted to buy in this community could not finance their units, and that's still going on to this day, because this gentleman who he bought them as a company, this person is not letting go of any of them. So to this day, you have to pay cash, and really it's not a cash price point or a cash area. Most people that want to buy there want to buy FHA, but they can't. So these are all things that you should be looking at. Don't miss one if you're thinking about buying a condo within a few miles of the water, or really, I would say if you're buying a condo that's older, like let's say older than 20 years, if you're buying a condo that's more than 3 stories high, I would want to know absolutely everything that I just talked about on this video before I signed on the dotted line.